The woman showed up at the gate just after sundown, carrying a baby on one hip and dragging a boy by the hand through mud that was trying to swallow them both. The rain had been falling for 3 days, the kind of cold, relentless October rain that turned roads into rivers, and she looked like she'd walked through every drop of it. Her dress was soaked black. Her hair hung in ropes across a face so pale it seemed to glow. The baby wasn't crying, which was the thing that made Josiah Tate put down his coffee and step off the porch, because a baby that quiet in weather this bad meant a baby too cold or too sick to make noise. "Please," she said when he reached the gate. Just that one word, and her legs buckled. Josiah caught her before she hit the ground, one arm around her waist while the other steadied the baby she was clutching with the death grip of a mother who would drown before she let go. The boy, maybe 6 years old, pressed against her side and stared up at Josiah with eyes that held the flat, burned-out look of a child who'd stopped being surprised by bad things. He got all 3 of them inside, where the heat from the wood stove hit them like a wall. The baby made a thin, reedy sound that was barely a cry. Josiah moved fast. Blankets, warm water, towels. The baby was a girl, maybe 8 months old, her skin mottled red and white, her lips carrying a blue tinge that made his gut clench. He'd seen that color on calves born in blizzards. "What's her name?" he asked, wrapping the baby in a dry blanket and holding her against his chest, because body heat was the fastest warmth available. "Alice." The woman's voice was shredded. "She was warm when we started. I kept her inside my coat, but it got wet and I couldn't. She's going to be fine. What's your name?" "Nora Callahan. This is my son, Emmett." The boy hadn't moved from the door. "Are we safe here?" he asked. And the question was directed at Josiah with the blunt precision of a child who'd learned that the answer depended on the man, not the place. "You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Emmett studied him, then walked to his mother and sat at her feet, close enough to touch, but facing the door, guarding it. A 6-year-old boy guarding a door against whatever they'd been running from. Josiah filed that away and focused on the crisis. He heated broth and got Nora to drink, while Emmett accepted warm milk and bread that he ate in careful, rationed bites, the pattern of a child who'd learned food wasn't guaranteed. Alice nursed when Nora warmed enough, and the greedy sound of the baby feeding loosened something in Josiah's chest. An hour later, Nora was dry and wrapped in blankets, Alice asleep in a makeshift cradle, and Emmett had finally closed his eyes. "We'll be gone in the morning," Nora said, staring at the fire, "as soon as the rain lets up." "Where are you going?" "West, past the mountains. My husband's cousin might take us in." "Might. Will. He said he would, 3 months ago." She paused. "Before my husband died." Josiah studied her face. Nora Callahan was maybe 25, thin in the way that spoke of months of not eating enough. Her hands were cracked from exposure, and there was a bruise on her left wrist, yellowed, fading, that she kept pulling her sleeve down to cover. The bruise was the shape of fingers. "How did your husband die?" Something shuddered behind her eyes. Fever, 6 weeks ago. Josiah didn't believe her, but he didn't push. The settlement you're headed for is Harlan's Creek, he said. 80 miles through a pass that's already snowing. With 2 children on foot in October, you won't make it. We'll make it. We've come this far. How far? 16 days from Coulter's Flat. 100 miles in 16 days. A woman with a baby and a small boy, walking through deteriorating weather on inadequate food. The fact they were alive was proof that Nora Callahan was considerably tougher than she looked. I'll take my children and go in the morning, Nora said again. We don't need charity. It's not charity, it's common sense. The creek's flooding. Your daughter was hypothermic an hour ago. I can't stay here, I don't know you. The fear was rising now. I've learned that men who offer help usually want something in return. Josiah looked at the sleeping boy who guarded doors, at the bruise on Nora's wrist. He understood what she'd been running from. It wasn't fever that had killed her husband. I'm going to tell you something, he said carefully. I have a ranch, 1,200 acres, and a house with 4 empty bedrooms because I've lived alone since my wife passed 7 years ago. I have no interest in anything except knowing you and those children are safe and warm. In the morning, you're free to leave. But tonight you have a roof and a fire and food. That's all this is. Nora weighed his words against every lesson life had taught her. It was Emmett who broke the silence. The boy had opened his eyes. Mama, he said quietly, he's telling the truth. I can tell. Something cracked in Nora's expression. Not trust. Trust was too much for this soon. But the exhaustion of a woman who'd been running so long that stopping felt more terrifying than the thing she was running from. Her shoulders dropped, and the tears she'd been holding since the gate spilled over. Josiah didn't move, didn't touch her. He sat across the room and gave her the only thing she might accept, space. One night, she said when it passed. We'll stay one night. The rain didn't stop. The creek flooded its banks on the 3rd morning. No one was going anywhere for at least a week. Nora accepted this with tight-jawed stoicism. She insisted on earning her keep, cleaning, cooking, mending, and worked with a fierce intensity that made it clear she wasn't accepting charity, but paying a debt. Josiah let her. He understood the need of someone who'd had everything taken to feel they were contributing. Emmett thawed first. On the 2nd morning, Josiah found the boy at the corral fence, watching the horses with naked longing. You like horses? We had one in Coulter's Flat. Mama sold her before we left. Because you needed the money? Because she couldn't come with us. Mama said we had to travel light. She said we might have to walk through places where horses couldn't go. Josiah looked at the boy, 6 years old, carrying information about flight and survival that no child should possess, and felt something hot and angry kindle in his chest. Not at Emmett, at whatever had made a mother choose between a horse and her children's lives. Would you like to meet mine? The bay mare Penny. She likes having her nose scratched. The smile that crossed Emmett's face was so sudden it physically hurt, because it revealed how rare smiling had become for this boy. He climbed the fence with the agility of a child who'd been told to stay quiet and still for too long and was remembering what his body was for. Josiah taught him to brush Penny that morning, check her hooves the next, saddle her the day after. Each lesson was a small door opening in the boy's guarded world, and Josiah was careful to let Emmett choose which ones to walk through and which to leave closed. By the fourth day, Emmett was arriving at the corral before Josiah, already talking to Penny in the low, gentle voice that horses responded to, and that told Josiah this boy had a gift he didn't know about yet. One evening after the horse lessons, Emmett sat on the porch step beside Josiah and said, without looking up from the piece of leather he was learning to braid, "My pa never let me near the horses. He said I was too small and too stupid and I'd get kicked." Josiah kept his voice even. "You're not stupid, Emmett, and Penny hasn't kicked you yet." "She won't. I can feel it. She likes me." The boy paused, his small fingers working the leather. "Is it true that some men don't hit? Mama says there are men who don't, but I never met one before." The question landed in Josiah's chest like a fist. He took a slow breath before answering. "Most men don't hit, Emmett. The ones who do are broken inside, and the breaking is their fault, not yours, not ever yours." Emmett considered this with the terrible seriousness of a child evaluating information that might save his life. Then he nodded once and went back to his braiding, and Josiah sat beside him in the fading light and let the silence do the work that words couldn't. Nora watched all of this from the kitchen window, saying nothing about the way Emmett was beginning to talk at dinner or how he'd stopped watching doors. But she noticed. Josiah could see her noticing, constant and instinctive, the vigilance of a creature whose survival depended on knowing where her young were at all times. The truth came out on the fifth night, the way truth always came out. Not in a dramatic confession, but in the quiet space between two people who'd been circling each other long enough to stop pretending. Children asleep, Josiah mending a bridle at the table while Nora darned socks across from him. Fire low. Rain finally softened to a steady drizzle that sounded almost peaceful. "His name was Patrick," Nora said without preamble. "He didn't die of fever." Josiah set down the bridle. He didn't say anything. He waited. He drank. He drank and he hit me and he hit Emmett. And when Alice was born, he got worse because he wanted a son and God gave him another girl. Nora's hands kept moving, the needle rising and falling with mechanical precision. "The night he died, he came home from the saloon and told me he was going to teach Emmett to be a man. He had his belt off, and Emmett was backed against the wall, and her hand stopped. "I hit him with the fire iron. Once. He fell and hit his head on the hearth, and he didn't get up." The words filled the room like smoke. Josiah sat very still. "The doctor called it an accident, said Patrick was drunk and fell. Most people believed it, or pretended to." Nora's voice was steady now, rehearsed smooth. "But Patrick's brother didn't believe it. He told me he knew what I'd done, said he'd take the children, Said he had friends who'd swear I was an unfit mother. She drew a breath. We left that night. I took what I could carry and we started walking. Josiah looked at this woman, this small, exhausted, terrified woman who'd killed a man to protect her son and walked 100 miles to keep her children, and felt every judgment he'd ever heard about what women should be crumble into dust. You did what any mother would do, he said. I killed my husband. You saved your son. Nora looked up, and for the first time, her eyes held something besides fear. Not hope. Hope was too expensive, but the beginning of the possibility of it. Patrick's brother Declan, he'll come looking. He's not the kind who lets things go. If he finds us here, it means trouble for you. I've had trouble before. Not this kind. Declan has money and the temperament of a man who'd burn a barn to kill a rat inside it. Then he'll find out what's in his path. Josiah picked up the bridle. Harlan's Creek. Your husband's cousin Michael. I know him. Good man. But the pass won't open until spring. You can't walk it with a baby in winter. He threaded leather through a buckle. Here's what I'm proposing. You stay through winter. When the pass opens in April, I'll take you to Harlan's Creek myself. Wagon, supplies, escort if necessary. That's 5 months. It is. I can't stay in a man's house for 5 months. Louisa, my foreman's wife, lives behind the barn. You stay in the house. I'll move to the bunkhouse. Everything proper. Why would you do this? My wife's name was Elena. She was small like you, tough like you. She died 7 years ago. Something in her lungs the doctor couldn't fix. November, weather just like this. He paused. I've spent 7 years alone, telling myself I didn't need anyone. But then you showed up at my gate carrying a baby and dragging a boy through the mud. And I realized the reason to stop being alone doesn't have to be romantic. Sometimes it's just that someone needs help and you're able to give it. Nora's eyes filled. 5 months, then Harlan's Creek. 5 months, then wherever you want to go. The weeks settled into rhythm. Louisa returned and took to Nora immediately. The house filled with sounds it hadn't held in 7 years. Alice's first real laugh. Emmett's boots on the porch at dawn. Nora singing softly in the kitchen, testing whether the sound was allowed, then louder as weeks passed, and she began to believe this fragile peace might hold. Emmett grew, not just taller, but in how he moved through the world. The guarded boy became a child who left doors open. He learned to ride with a natural grace that made the foreman say the boy was born for it. He started talking about the future, whether Josiah would teach him to rope in spring, whether there were schools near Harlan's Creek. A 6-year-old talking about the future as if he believed he had one. That was worth more than anything else that winter. December brought Declan Callahan. He rode in on a gray afternoon with 2 men flanking him, all 3 wearing guns, and the expression of people who expected to find what they were looking for and didn't intend to negotiate. Josiah saw them from the barn and walked out to meet them with the unhurried stride of a man on his own land. He didn't rush. He didn't reach for a weapon. Men like the ones riding toward his house could smell fear the way dogs smelled blood, and showing any would make what came next considerably harder. Behind him he heard the kitchen door close, Nora pulling the children inside, Louisa's voice murmuring reassurance. Declan Callahan was a big man, thick through the chest and arms, with a face that had done a lot of scowling and not much else. He didn't dismount. I'm looking for a woman and 2 children, Nora Callahan. She's my brother's wife. Your brother's widow, from what I understand. Something ugly crossed Declan's face. She tell you that? She tell you how he died? That woman murdered my brother, and she stole his children, and I've got legal papers from a judge in Coulter's flat saying those children belong with family. They're real family. Papers from a judge in a town where you've got friends? Josiah said evenly. Signed before anyone asked the woman or the children what they wanted. Declan leaned forward in the saddle. I'm not here to debate, mister. Hand them over, the woman too, and we'll be on our way. Josiah looked at Declan, then at his hired men. Muscle from the look of them, the kind who did what they were paid to without questions. He took a slow breath. I'm going to explain something. This is my land. You're on it without invitation. The woman and children are guests under my protection, and the judge who signed those papers has no jurisdiction in this territory. He let the facts settle. You can ride off this property the way you came, or you can find out what happens to trespassers who threaten women and children on my ranch. My foreman is in the barn behind me with a rifle. My neighbor to the north has been watching through his field glass since you turned off the main road. And the territorial marshal is a personal friend who I'll be writing to this afternoon regardless. It was partly a bluff. Old Pete was real enough, 70 years old and deaf in one ear, but he could still shoot straight. The neighbor might or might not be watching. The marshal was a friend, though Josiah hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. But Declan didn't know any of that. All he saw was a man on his own ground with no fear in his face. Declan stared at Josiah for a long moment. Then he leaned back and smiled, cold, calculating, a smile that promised this wasn't finished. We'll be back. With proper papers and proper authority. Your protection won't mean a damn thing. He wheeled his horse and rode out with his men. Josiah watched them go, waited until the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded, then walked to the house and knocked on the kitchen door. Nora opened it. Her face was white, but her eyes were dry. Emmett stood behind her, holding a kitchen knife in his small fist, and Josiah felt his heart break at the sight. A boy with a blade, ready to fight a man 3 times his size, because that's what his life had taught him to do. He's gone, for now. He'll come back, probably, but not today. Josiah knelt down and gently took the knife from Emmett's hand. You won't need this, son. Not here. Not ever again. Emmett looked at the knife, then at Josiah, then at his mother. Something passed between the 3 of them in that moment, not spoken, not planned, but understood the way certain things are understood when people recognize that what they've been building together matters too much to let someone destroy it. A decision made in the silence between heartbeats. We're not going to Harlan's Creek, Nora said quietly. Are we? Josiah stood slowly. That's your decision to make. I'm making it. Nora's voice was steady for the first time since he'd known her. Not the forced steadiness of a woman pretending to be strong, but the real thing, the bone-deep calm of someone who'd finally found the ground beneath her feet. I'm making it right now. We're staying. Josiah looked at her. This woman who'd walked 100 miles with a baby and a boy, who'd killed a man to save her son, who'd arrived at his gate with nothing and had somehow filled his empty house with everything that mattered, and felt 7 years of loneliness crack open like a dam. Then you're staying, he said. They didn't talk about love that night, or for many nights after. There was too much to settle first. The legal protection Nora needed, the territorial papers Josiah filed on her behalf, the letter to the marshal that brought a deputy to the ranch within the week. Declan came back twice more, and both times found a property so well documented and legally fortified that his Coulter's Flat papers were worthless. The third time he tried, the deputy was waiting, and Declan Callahan discovered that threatening a woman under territorial protection carried consequences his brother's money couldn't buy away. The love came later the way it should, slowly, carefully, built on the foundation of trust that Nora had never known and Josiah had forgotten how to offer. It came in small things, Josiah teaching Emmett to saddle his own horse while Nora watched from the porch with Alice on her hip. Nora leaving coffee on the bunkhouse step on cold mornings, a gesture so small it could have meant nothing but meant everything. Emmett calling him by name instead of sir. Then one morning in February, without any warning or ceremony, calling him Pa and carrying on with his breakfast as if he'd been saying it all his life. Josiah's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Across the table, Nora's eyes met his, bright with something she'd been afraid to name. Neither of them said a word. Emmett shoveled eggs into his mouth, oblivious to the fact that he'd just rearranged the architecture of 3 people's lives with a single syllable. They married in the spring, the same week the pass to Harlan's Creek finally opened. They married not because Nora needed protection or Josiah needed company, but because they'd spent 5 months building something together that deserved a name, and the name was family. The preacher who rode out to perform the ceremony remarked that he'd never seen a groom look so calm or a bride look so fierce. And Louisa told him that was because neither of them was doing something reckless. They were doing something they'd already decided, months ago, in the quiet certainty of 2 people who'd survived enough to know what mattered. The gate that Josiah had closed on a rainy October night stayed open after that. Not because there was nothing left to protect, but because the people inside no longer needed a locked gate to feel safe. They had something better, each other, and the stubborn, hard-won knowledge that home wasn't a place you ran to. It was a place where someone saw you coming through the rain and said, "Not tonight. Tonight you stay."